Hi, I'm Piotr. I'm super happy to be here. I haven't actually been to a stage for 5 years now. So, this is a big comeback to the conference circuit for me. But the last time I was on stage, there was this pervasive belief among speakers that a good talk needs audience engagement. And I wonder if this is still the case. How many of you have been to a talk that started with a show of hands? Perfect, thank you. That's what I'm talking about. So this talk is titled Simplified and Add Lightness. This is not something I came up with, because obviously not, but it's a quote from Colin Chapman, who was, does anybody know who Colin Chapman was? Excellent, because I didn't either, and I felt extremely clueless about it. So Colin Chapman was the founder of Lotus Cars, and this was the advice he gave to his design team, that you might like Lotus Cars, you might not like Lotus Cars, but they are definitely distinctive, and they are, I think, a very interesting take on the automotive industry. They have electric cars now, a lot of interesting development there. So I'm extremely fond of Eurukos. Actually, in 2010, when I was wrapping up, as I thought, my academic years, and I was turning in my PhD, and as usual, there was a deadline. The deadline was very unfairly not only end of February, but actually not on a leap year. So, I got scammed twice, basically. But, it was 28th of February 2010, and I sent my PDF at 9 p.m., and I did, what do I do with my life now, right? So I decided maybe I look for a conference to speak at. And as it would happen, the Euruko that year was in Krakow, and the deadline for CFP submissions was also February 28th. So I did submit, I did get selected. This is still one of my favorite logos of a Euruko conference. That was in Krakow. I arrived at the conference. I was first speaking engagement, I didn't know what to expect. I was scheduled right after Matt's keynote. So that already kind of put some red flags in my mind. But then it was one of those traditional Euruko conferences where Matt gets stuck along the way. And that time, I think he was stuck in Prague. So I ended up opening that conference. And, this was my face back then. Again, it was, 14 years ago. Apparently, I'm pointing to this guy who looks so much better now. And as you can probably see, he was also speaking at the conference. And, he was 25, I was already 30, but a lot of things happened since then. But those were super interesting times, What was in 2010? Who remember what MERP was? Excellent. So MERP was a very interesting take on web apps back then, but it got merged into Rails 3.0. That got released in 2010. What else did Rails 3.0 give us? A new router with an emphasis on RESTful declarations. It wasn't a thing before that. Active record chainable query language built on top of relational algebra. Super interesting things at that time. Unobtrusive JavaScript helpers. This was how we did kind of more usable front ends back then, still, ERB rendered, and bundler. That was the time when dependency management with bundler got added to Rails. And I'm mentioning all this because it was a very good era for very good kinds of tooling. This kind of tooling that is helpful, that makes you more productive, and is actually super pleasant to use. So let's skip 9 years ahead. And what do we remember, some of us at least, from the year 2019? Ember.js 3.7 got released, and the first release information is that drops support for Node 4. A little bit less tongue-in-cheek, React 16.8 added hooks. That was a big change in the front-end world. But a lot of the web development was about front-end. Those were two, and still are to a large extent, two very different worlds. But also Rails 6.0 got released. And we got multiple databases support, which the question whether it's about simplicity can be controversial, but to this day at work, and I happen to work with Jean at that easily confused with a music platform company Shopify, I still am one of the maintainers of two services that happen to use two code bases only because they were created before Rails 6.0, and it was so much easier to just spin up a new service to talk to a new database. So multiple databases support is actually a simplicity thing if you think about it. Parallel testing. If your tests are so slow that they need parallelization, you have bigger problems. But parallel testing gives idempotency of sorts to your tests. That's super important. And side work. Like that was, as Xavier mentioned, the version of Rails that added side work. But also, Webpacker by default. Why? Like, why do we need, like, HTTP 2 was already 4 years old back then. Why do we still need to compile a lot of JavaScript files to another JavaScript file that then gets served as a single asset? Back then, it was mostly that thing, that caching, like all of the things that are actually served on the network layer, solved on the network layer, rather than, by convoluted tooling. Thank you. So, as we already heard, the Euruko in 2019 was in Rotterdam. So Carmen remembers it fondly. Me as well, obviously. I like it very much. I was, obviously 5 years younger, but also 10 kilos younger. But I'm working on that. I bought a treadmill last month. I'll get back there. This T-shirt almost fits, so I wear it so people can make this mental connection about personal branding online, right? Like me, this person, like, smile still sometimes. Yeah. But like we, Tomasz and I and Bernard were running a Ruby web shop that turned to be Ruby and JavaScript web shop. We were 9 years older. I was pushing 40, Tomasz was pushing 35. He had new hobbies, totally reasonable given the state of the ecosystem back then, already looking much better. So how does it look today? Well, we have SPAs everywhere, single page applications everywhere. We need to keep our HTML hydrated. The front-end tools are chugging on. Like Vue is sometimes used for very good reasons, but React in particular and the TypeScript flavor seems to be quite pervasive and popular. Backend for them is a separate thing. Like a lot of current web applications have backend that serves JSON from Java, Python, TypeScript, maybe Ruby, maybe Rails, not necessarily. And what we saw was a very interesting, and I'm not, poking at this. This was actually very interesting sequence of developments in the front-end world. Things like micro front-ends that are sometimes referred as taking microservices to the front-end, which I think is a bit of disservice by now, but it's an interesting problem to solve and an interesting solution to that problem. But we also had both backend for front-end, which is our backend should support what the front-end needs to render. If we have very different views for mobile and web, we should have two different backend endpoints for those. But we also have backend-driven UIs now, which is the backend defines what the UI should look, and the front end, it's still a separate code base, but it should basically do what it's told by the backend, which currently means that if you're a front-end developer and you are tasked with doing something in a backend-driven UI, you either better also do it on the backend, or you have to communicate with whatever, Java person, maybe TypeScript, another TypeScript person, I don't know, maybe, Python developers I heard are making a comeback right now, so, so the thing is, of course it stopped working, yeah. Like, what happened? What happened that we have now, like, this kind of two separate worlds? We have the front-end stack, we have the back-end stack. they technically talk to each other, but sometimes more than the developers who work on them, like what went wrong. But also, today we have Unpoly and Mru.js. It's a modern Ruby unobtrusive JavaScript, but it's spelled with capital M only, so I don't know. We have the tooling to do, like static-ish HTML with enough of JavaScript sprinkled on top of it for it to actually be usable in a good way. We have action cable. We can make the browser communicate back and forth with a backend in a very dynamic fashion. We have Hotwire. We already have discussions whether something should be, this much flavor of Hotwire. Should we be doing more of like TurboLinks only thing? And those are good discussions, and they show that we are still in the kind of teething phase, but already have solutions for kind of more dynamicism and a bit more simplicity. But we could be there with some caveats that I can mention because this is important. Like, this is again a very, very good time to be a Ruby developer, is my point. This is actually from 2018, but like we should probably recreate this photo at some point at this conference, maybe. No, apparently not. So, why things are like this? This is not a comment on the photo, it's about the state of the. So one take is that, the zero interest rate period ended, and there is just less money flowing into IT. LLMs are taking on, like, this is from Gargeli Oros's Pragmatic Engineer website. I'm not necessarily supporting this. I'm not sure this is true, but smaller teams need to deliver linear solutions is the theory. Quicker turnaround and simpler deploys are a thing. Maybe, like those are extremely good side effects. Maybe those are the driving forces, but for me the important thing is actually more fulfilling experience via one-person frameworks. Like if you saw DH8's videos and the blog post, the one-person framework, this is where we are again getting into. This is not very new, or revolutionary by now, but this is a very interesting time to live on. The pendulum between front-end and back-end and between operating on the user devices versus rendering things on the server when we have better control and can actually scale it potentially more is swinging back. So how can we do this if this is something we actually want to do? So this is a bit cut off, but there is a website. Let me see whether I can make it smaller, actually. Okay, so radicalsimply.cd, because domain hacks are a thing. It's actually one-page website, and it basically shows you this idea that you can replace some already entrenched things, Vue, Nuxt, Webpack, Babel, JavaScript SPAs, and so on and so forth, with this other approach. It doesn't, in my opinion, it's very important to understand that it has its vices. There's always a trade-off, but we're back, so to speak, if you're of the backend persuasion like I am. You can run a monolith, you can sprinkle Unpoly on it, you can run your caching and your Elastic stuff and so on in Postgres, which is I remember using Postgres 6.9 quarter century ago, 25 years ago, and back then it was the underdog of the database world. Right now, it's not as much. This is from the amazingcto.com, another website that decides to also, just use the right font for everything. But it is true that for a lot of use cases, not for all, this is super important, but for a lot of use cases, Postgres is just fine. We can have PubSub in Postgres. We can have full text search in Postgres. We can have a lot of very interesting things like geolocation objects straight in Postgres. We can, I never did that, but we can expose Postgres as REST APIs. Like you can actually chug out JSON out of Postgres, and the native JSON support in Postgres is top-notch. So you can have Postgres as a document database if you really want to, and so on and so forth. So you can replace a lot of those things with Postgres, but we can make one simpler. And this is a technology that, I don't like this word, but this is a solution that makes a huge comeback, SQLite. Again, you probably have heard enough talks about it already. There is a workshop, how to use SQLite, how to tune it for modern Rails usages, and so on and so forth. SQLite is a really interesting bit of technology because it used to be that, toy database that Rails uses by default, so you don't have to set up a proper grown-up RDBMS. And it was like, okay, you can build your app, but then you actually want to deploy it, so just keep your fingers crossed that Active Record will be agnostic enough, and you will just switch it to some other database, and it will keep working, and so on and so forth. But there are projects like LiteStack, which is a Rails, and not only, because it also hooks into SQL, for example. It's a super, super optimistic for me, as in I'm optimistic looking at it, and I think it's also very ambitious, but it's a very interesting thing that, data, obviously SQLite, LiteDB. Cache, there's LiteCache. Like you can spin up SQLite in memory, use it as a cache. Is it worse than Memcache? Maybe, you should benchmark, but it's still, the advantage is it's simpler. It's the same solution. PubSub, LiteCable. Job queues, LiteJob. Like you can actually put your jobs in SQLite. If it's in memory, it's like Redis without persistence. If it's on disk, it's like Redis with persistence. Like, will you run into performance issues? Maybe, probably. Would you run into them with whatever default Redis settings are? Maybe, like I saw enough cases where just mistakenly or by default Redis was put in another data center that, you could crank it up very much, but the network latencies were killing it anyway. There's even a light metric part that makes SQLite work for the metrics use cases. So, it's even light search. There's even full text search built on top of SQLite. So with LiteStack, you basically, for surprisingly long time, you can go with whatever toy project you're spinning up in an afternoon, whatever, I want to have a small social network for sharing photos with my family without necessarily giving them out to one of the, 4 big corporations. We can now again implement it fairly easily, especially with a little propping up with LLMs that churn out the needed, HTML and so on. If you're not very much into that part of coding, we can actually build things in an afternoon again, and those things are usable. And, Tomasz, this is Tomasz actually from this year. Tomasz gave a very good talk that, again, is called SQLite. It's not a toy anymore, and you can watch it. The meme SQLite is a serious database, now always have been. It is very interesting time to live in, and I'm super happy for SQLite being there. So how did we get here? Like, how can we get all of the advantages of all of those tools that are being suddenly very quickly developed? Like SQLite did have, from my point of view, a bit of a lull. Like it didn't really matter how many versions behind you are. Now, the tooling around it and the base tools underneath, there are clear advantages to keeping them upgraded. So you get new features. And if you remember Rails upgrades from 3 or Rails 4 era, they always, or even 5 or 6, they always took ages, but they were worth it. Speed. Like Ruby gets faster every Christmas. Like every new Ruby release is significantly faster than the previous one. My wonderful colleagues at Shopify are working on widget. This is giving currently a lot of boosts in every Ruby release. It's worth upgrading your Ruby version, but it also sometimes means you have to upgrade other things because new versions of X usually work with the newest versions of Y, and backwards compatibilities hopefully work, but eventually you will run into this circle of hell where like I really want to upgrade this because there's a new feature, but then I have to upgrade that other thing, and that triggers a chain of upgrades. So is it feasible right now to keep things actually upgrading? Like upgrading is a pain. Nobody pays us for upgrading. I've been contractor in a lot of projects where we've been running a very old Ruby version with a very old Rails version very late, like years without support, very, very bad situation. So the good thing, this is also got much simpler. We use the Pendabot, or you can use any tool like this and do continuous deployment. We run the biggest Ruby code base and we just deploy continuously, even sometimes 100 times a day or more. Like we actually built our own deploy pipeline because we couldn't deploy everything. Like we couldn't deploy on every pull request merge because they were coming too fast. So you can do that. With GitHub Actions, you can do it fairly easily. You can use canary deploys. You're probably not there. I congratulate you if you're on the we need canary deploys phase because it means you've already won. But you can deploy to a subset of your servers and have a subset of clients experience any problems. And you mostly don't experience them. And because you have most things on the newest version, you actually very often experience fewer issues. Shopify monolith runs on main. We don't run on the newest stable Rails version. We actually run on main. I think we merge every 2 weeks and then deploy to canaries, see whether everything seems to be working. And if not, we keep fixing it. And we have a policy that we upgrade all of our Ruby code bases because we actually have quite a lot of repositories other than the monolith on April 1st. So like 3 months after the Christmas release. And Rails is on July 1st, whatever the newest stable version is, you're supposed to upgrade by then. And this is doable even in huge projects. Like, I know if you're contracting, your clients are not very fond of hearing you need to upgrade things, but there are huge benefits to this. And we also built our own tooling to actually run on Rails main called SolidTrack. So there are solutions, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Like, be aware what the trade-offs are. Like, it's wonderful to have a full stack development experience where we build everything on the back end, sprinkle it with a little bit of JavaScript, and it mostly works. My point is, it actually is very often more reliable than whatever the disconnected front-end stack optimistically shows to the user while trying to kind of cross its finger and make the underlying API requests work. But, do you remember what this website was? Craigslist, yes. I realized I didn't cut all of the references. But do you feel like, how old is this screenshot in years?
This week.
Yeah, it's yesterday. The calendar is right there, like Tuesday. So, like, this website is a top US 100 websites. It's written in Perl. It's been chugging on nicely. Like, obviously, this is a very biased example. But if you're building something for yourself, or, I don't know, your homeowners association, whatever people in our age bracket do right now, and I try to make myself younger unnecessarily. But, I don't know, your kids go to various units of taking care of them during work hours. And those communities need simple tools. Like, we can, again, build them quickly with our Ruby tooling right now. And, this is, again, a bookmark. It's Pinboard. It's a bookmarks website that also was written in Perl. I mean, it works. Obviously, again, a biased example, but not everything needs to be extremely front-end driven, extremely, two-stack build. So simplify, simplify, simplify is a quote from Henry David Thoreau, and I'm hopeless with pronunciations, but this is what is in Apple's, I think, at headquarters, where Steve Jobs just crossed the first two simplifies, right? We can make things simpler and enjoy them. Just remember about the trade-offs. The keep it simple, stupid principle is a very good principle. It's actually, I learned that it was first kind of coded by the US Navy in 1960s. US Navy was also why SQLite was built, because they needed a database for ships that was super reliable and not necessarily online. Please do appreciate simplicity. Get more done with fewer moving parts. This is doable. Check out LiteStack if you have a free afternoon and if you're into this kind of things. But it's amazing how much we can do with a simple database. We're maintaining libSQL, which is a version of SQLite that has some interesting things like libSQL server. We can actually expose SQLite on the network if we really want or need to. It doesn't have to be a local file system database. Be aware and be vocal about the trade-offs. Like, there are no silver bullets. If you are proposing rewriting a small part or building something new with this new stack that we have, be very, very clear with whomever you're building it for. There are trade-offs, but they are very often worth it. So this is a tweet from Xavier, who spoke, opened the conference, and this is exactly from 2019. Shout out to Beirut, who spoke just before me. In the last weeks, he has focused on adapting Shopify to Sidework, which they have in production, providing extraordinary feedback about performance relevant to applications in their scale. Thanks to his work, the gem is better today for everyone. As Xavier mentioned, this is 4 months before Rails 6.0 got released. Shopify is investing heavily in tooling because it pays off. And it's been like this since forever. So, those are not pipe dreams of, oh, it's cute, but my clients will never allow that. We have no real world use cases for those things. Yes, we can. We can run in production software that is not yet fully stable if we know the trade-offs and we have the scale to catch issues. I've been bringing you at Tomasz times and again because he's having a birthday today. Statistically, probably not only him, but welcome to the other side. You're a 40-year-old now, and it only gets better. Only gets better, really. Thanks so much. I will put up the slides up there. Thanks so much.